Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner is an IDF spokesman, and he joins me from Israel. Shalom, sir.
Hello, shalom.
First of all, we've just been listening to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is there on the ground in Israel, and it now appears that certainly the U.S. administration, and we had already heard from President Biden, is pushing for a humanitarian pause. Do you think that will happen? Will Israel agree to that? And what are some of the inherent risks in that?
So obviously that's not really something that is being discussed by the IDF. The IDF is busy now on day 28 of our war against Hamas. Of course, we do see the humanitarian mission as part of our overall mission. And that's why we are facilitating evacuation of Palestinians from north to south, from the north of Gaza Strip to the south, encouraging people to go. That's why we've determined a humanitarian zone in the southwest area of the Gaza Strip, the Mawasi area, so that will be a safer zone, even within the safer zone of the south. And of course, the coordination of access to Gaza for humanitarian goods, food supplies, medical supplies, water, all coming in from Gaza, from Egypt, from Rafah into the Gaza Strip. Something like, I think yesterday it was around 80 trucks a day, and it's increasing almost every day now over the last week. And that's part of the mission. Will there be a humanitarian hiatus if the government instructs us to do so? The IDF, of course, can hold fire. We are concerned that Hamas will take advantage of that, and that is why anything that goes in cannot alleviate Hamas's situation from an operational perspective.
And in fact, that was referred to by the Secretary of State, where he's saying that there are, deep discussions about the why, how, and when, and the fact that, that this has to help people on the ground. It's not to help Hamas and for them to take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's precisely the concern. We can't help just 2 weeks ago, Hamas went into a UN facility, a UN compound, and took food, medical supplies, and fuel for their tools. And this was on the second week of the war, something that the UN announced and then later erased because they were afraid for their lives. It just goes to show the type of organization we're facing. We know, we released, for instance, a conversation between a health administrator in the Al-Shifa hospital today, saying that beneath the Al-Shifa hospital, there's 500,000 liters of fuel that could supply the hospital, but is going to Hamas's operations. It just goes to show why we are concerned. What are our concerns about? And of course, fuel going into Hamas means that they can operate underground. They're using it to power their ventilation system, their water systems, everything that they've built underground.
So I don't think in my time of covering Israel, going back decades, I have ever seen the push and the effort by the Prime Minister's office, by the IDF spokesman's office, to engage media and try to get their message out. I mean, you are fighting a ground war, but you're also fighting a propaganda war. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Terrorist organizations have nothing except for the ability to amplify their terror. And that is why we understand that from day one of their attack against us, the hourglass of international legitimacy is not in our favor, on one hand, but also that they will be doing everything to manipulate emotions of the world, of Israeli society, on different levels. So when they are releasing videos, for instance, of hostages, they are trying to expose the most raw nerves of Israeli society. And when they intentionally prevent Palestinians from evacuating areas where we say we're going to strike, it's because they want to exasperate the situation on the ground in order to create more international efforts against us. So yeah, it's a huge challenge.
I mean, I know you probably personally are affected too, when you look at what happened on October the 7th. And Blinken looked visibly shaken today when he said he looked at another video of when one of the terrorists, chased a father and sons into a shelter and then shot the father in front of the kids. The kids ran back in the house, and the the terrorists went into the house and ate from the refrigerator. And Blinken noted that the outrage at this event, and the brutality, we have to ask ourselves, why has it faded so quickly? What certainly not in Israel, but why has it faded, do you think, around the world, and why shouldn't it?
So first of all, it shouldn't, because what Hamas has done over the last 16 years of power, they've normalized their place as a legitimate player at the table. Israel in itself had never, up until now, up until the 7th of October, created a strategic objective to remove Hamas from power. And so in its own action, it was basically legitimizing the presence of Hamas in the region. And therefore, when Hamas has conducted their most abominable attack against the people of Israel, against the South, there was, the question was automatically, okay, how much time can we tell this story of why things needs to change? And when we look around at the world leaders, everybody understands that the end game needs to one where we rid the world of Hamas as a governing authority of the Gaza Strip. And the only question is, how do we do it, and what is the expense? And this is the challenge. It's a challenge for the military. It's a challenge for the world, but the world does need to rally around that idea that the end goal must be removal of Hamas. They cannot be allowed to hold the Gaza Strip as a governing authority to build a terrorist army as they did, to utilize all the tools of government for acts of terrorism. The world will be patient if we are susceptible and attentive to the expectations of the world, and we'll see what happens in the diplomatic arena after the meeting with between Secretary of State Blinken and Prime Minister and the President and so on, and there might be some changes, but it won't. I think it won't change the end goal that has to change. It needs to be a fundamental paradigm change, and I think Israel and the people of Israel won't settle for anything less. The bar is now set very high for Israel, and I think it was Golda Meir said that once that if I need to be liked and pitied, or despised and dead, I'll be despised. And I think this is the general mind state or the psyche of most Israelis that woke up on the 7th of October to the sirens. And this is how I'm a reservist. I've been retired from the military 5 years ago. I never ever thought I would be in uniform again, representing the state of Israel and the IDF specifically. And when the siren sounded on the 7th of October, at 6:30 in the morning, when I was lying there next to my wife in bed, and the sirens in my phone were going wild, and my wife opened her eyes and said, "What's going on?" And I said, "The sirens are sounding down south." And as I said down south, then the sirens near where I live in Tel Aviv began to ring. So we went down with my daughter down into our shelter in the house. And when I came up from the shelter, I'd already seen the magnitude on Telegram channels, on social media, of what Hamas was doing. And I said to my wife, this is something we've never experienced in our lifetime. And I hadn't even grasped the magnitude of the actions of death that they'd done. And so Israeli society, all of Israeli society, and if you would have asked me a month ago, Peter, what is the Israeli society? How is it? And I would have probably said torn to pieces. But around this, everybody is unified. Everybody is united in the idea that this is our existence.
Let me ask you about the fight in Gaza to take Hamas out. Do you think that these are achievable military objectives? And right now, why is it focused on Gaza City and surrounding Gaza City?
So the north of Gaza is the beating heart of Hamas's operations, of its decision-making capabilities, of its execution abilities. So any government has a center of government. So over the years, we've called Hamas a terrorist organization, but they are actually an entity with institutions and processes and finance and ministries, and is a government. So in order to, one, make sure they don't govern Gaza. We go after their center of gravity, which is the government. So yes, of course, it's achievable, because once you take down the government, they can't rule. If they can't rule, they don't have the tools of government. That means they can only focus on being a terrorist organization. And being a terrorist entity means that we will pursue them and hunt them down. And we're doing that in parallel as we take down. So I would say absolutely yes. The idea of destroying Hamas as a governing authority, as an organization that has the tools of government to conduct terrorism and organize terrorism against the state of Israel, at the end of this will be no longer existent. If you'd ask me, okay, but what about the hearts and mind, the ideal and the ideology of Hamas? Then we're not focusing on that. That is not our mission. But
if I can jump in, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you're saying just not remove them as the administrative authority in Gaza, but also as an operating terrorist organization, which means their ability to manufacture and deploy weapons, their ability to strike Israel with rockets. I mean, the whole deal.
That's what we are after, to change the security paradigm. They had the pleasures and the luxuries of government in order to build this industry of terror. And that will no longer exist. This is the end game. It has to change. I can't see any other option for Israel.
Do you worry?
The message to our enemies in the region is that you can butcher 1,400 or so Israelis and get away with it.
Let me ask you, when you hear these calls from Blinken and elsewhere where they say we have to reduce civilian casualties because there will be alienation of Palestinian civilians, he said today, if we show indifference to that, do you worry as an army person, as the spokesman for the IDF, that the moment you start talking about reducing civilian casualties in Gaza, that means probably you rely less on air power and more on boots on the ground and soldiers, which means that your soldiers probably are going to be in harm's way even more?
So we have substantial forces on the ground now. We are mobilized extensively. We are expanding our activities. We've encircled Gaza City, as you pointed out. And the Air Force have, I would say, their operations are still going, but they're now more focused on support efforts to support the ground forces. Up until now, the Air Force was the main, I would say, the main effort, but now it's more rolled back. It's not that there aren't more strategic attacks that can be conducted by the Air Force, but yes, indeed, the ground forces and the naval forces are conducting more and more activities.
Is the fight fierce? I mean, how would you characterize it?
Absolutely. There are face-to-face urban warfare being conducted. They come out of tunnels, attack our APCs, our armed personnel carriers, our tanks. They drop, use drones with explosives on that they use on our forces. So it is the understanding in Israel that this is a long war ahead. It's not something that's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to be an extended war. It's going to be an extended period of time. The magnitude of their institutionalized terrorism cannot be erased with a quick brush, a quick draw of the brush. It needs to be strategic, it needs to be systematic, and it needs to be extensive in its result. To date, we're now in the last 5 days of the ground operations that have expanded over time. There have been 24 soldiers killed in action, which is and if you compare to the hundreds of terrorists that have been killed in those exchanges, there's obviously nothing really comparable. But it is the type of warfare that we expect, that they will try and come out of the holes, come out of the tunnels, conduct attacks with RPGs and small machine gun fire, and it's going to be a long, challenging battle.
What also is challenging is that you can't look, it seems to me, at Gaza in isolation. You are being fired on by the Houthis from Yemen. Increasingly, there are exchanges on the northern border with Lebanon with the Hezbollah, and Hassan Nasrallah will no doubt make more threats in his speech today. And the strings are being pulled by Iran. Russia's playing a part in Syria. It's difficult when you take a look at the scope and breadth of this not to worry about it expanding and just to look at it as one kind of tip of the spear in Gaza, isn't it? And I'm sorry for that being a complicated question, but it's a complicated problem right now.
So the nature of Israel, the IDF's planning process for over the several years now is that there is never an isolated arena. The understanding is that if there is one front, it's usually going to be two or more. So indeed, when we, at the beginning of this war, when I was recruited on the 7th, 8th, and 9th of October, and colleagues like myself, we were recruited en masse. 300,000 reservists. It's the largest recruitment of reservists in the history of the IDF. And so many of those have been pre-positioned on the border with Lebanon to face and confront Hezbollah. To combine with the regular forces, there's a substantial force there. Many of those reservists are across the different services. So it's Air Force, Naval Forces, Ground Forces, Home Front Command. We are prepared for a confrontation also with Hezbollah, also potentially from Syria. The aerial defensive capabilities that have been proven by over the last few days with the surface-to-air missile, cruise missiles being shot by the Houthis have been intercepted by F-35 jets and also aerial defense systems like the Arrow. And so, yes, the working assumption is that there is a possibility that it will go broader than just Hamas and our focus will be shifted. We are saying very clearly that Hezbollah needs to decide if they represent Iran or represent Lebanon. If they represent Iran, it might be at the expense of Lebanon. And our message to Lebanon is very clear. Take charge of what Hezbollah is doing because you have a lot to lose. And our message to Hezbollah is also, look what we're doing to Hamas, step by step, stage by stage, strike by strike, and really think forward if you want to cross that threshold.
Lieutenant Colonel, last word to you, and you've been very generous with your time. Can we go back to where we started on the hostages? I know you put up a tweet the other day talking about how many are held, and the numbers have changed a little bit, but I just reel every time I see the numbers of children and the ages of some of those children, and we all hope that they can somehow be released in negotiations with an organization that's not very famous for caring about humanity. But can you just make your final comment just on those hostages that are being held in the efforts to try and get them out while you fight a war, while you try not to harm them in the process?
So the hostages are a national priority to bring them home. And it's one of the missions of this war is to bring them home. Today, there are 241 hostages being held, but that number goes up and down every day. It changes slightly because more intelligence is coming out, clarification that somebody was actually killed. So it's not being held hostage, but maybe a dead body, different levels of understanding of what is going on as the dynamics of this war develops. We rescued one hostage, Ori Megidish. She's a soldier in the observation posts, so gathering field intelligence. And she was abducted on the 7th of October, and she was rescued in quite a heroic intelligence-based mission. And we are utilizing all of the tools at our hand in order to identify, seek out, and find the hostages. So there's operational components that are ongoing in order to bring to their release, and also the diplomatic efforts that are also underway. Hamas are responsible for their well-being. Israel has demanded that the International Committee of the Red Cross have access to assess their situation, their well-being. Yeah. As far as I know, that hasn't happened yet. They need to be brought home. They need to be let free, as you said. babies from the age of 9 months old, and elderly over in their late 80s, and anybody in between, men, women, children. It's heartbreaking, it's devastating, and it is what Hamas does. So they need to be brought home. They need to be brought home now. We are doing what we can in order to bring them home. Just one example, we dropped leaflets in Gaza a few days ago, suggesting that there might be financial benefits if you give up information that brings to their release home. So we're utilizing all of the tools basically in the spectrum of hostage situation. And that's one of the core missions of this war.
Yeah, bring them home. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.